Hi, my name's Katie and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to talk about some tips for keeping your fish happy in your fish tank. Now, of course we can't get our fish to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how good their life satisfaction and well-being is, but as fish keepers we normally get a pretty good indication as to whether our fish are feeling happy and thriving versus when they're not doing so well. So in this video, I'm going to go through two main things that I think are kind of overarching things that help with the happiness of fish. And these two things are having a duality of consistency, but then also enrichment. Now, what I mean by that is consistency is having routine and allowing the fish to know what to expect. And that's mostly aimed at minimizing the stress that they experience. Whereas enrichment, you can think of it as actually adding something positive to their life. So they've got things in there that they actually enjoy. If you're enjoying this content that I'm making and liking these videos, I would love for you to give this video a like and to subscribe to my channel to show your support. And it also helps to get the video into the algorithm on YouTube so then more people can come across these videos. So firstly, how do you know if your fish is stressed out? Things like if they're pacing up and down the tank constantly, if they're changing colour and becoming really pale, if they're sitting near the top of the tank, if they're not eating and they're not receptive to that, when they're hiding a lot and it's unusual for that type of fish to hide. It's perfectly normal to see your fish doing some of these things, like doing the glass surfing every now and then, to sometimes see them actually rub their gills on a rock, to see fish sometimes sitting quietly in an area. This is completely normal behavior. The only time that it becomes concerning is if you see it all of the time. So when it's something that is pervasive and persistent and it's not going away. Particularly if you're seeing it in multiple of your fish as well, then it's a bit of a sign that something's not quite right in the tank and you might need to actually watch it and inspect it for a little bit to work out what's going on. So now that we know what to look for and determine whether a fish is stressed out versus when they're thriving, let's get into talking about consistency and what I mean by that. So when I talk about consistency, that's assuming that we have the foundational stuff down packed for our fish. So we've got a cycled tank and we don't have huge issues with water parameters where we're getting ammonia or nitrite spikes. If that's an issue that's happening, then we don't want that to be consistent. We definitely want to get our tank cycled so we've got healthy water parameters for our fish. More so what I mean when I talk about consistency, I talk about things like the lighting that we have for our fish and the lighting schedule. So knowing what time it's going to come on in the morning and go off at night, and trying to keep that the same every day so our fish have a bit of a routine and their circadian rhythm is going to be kicking in so that they know when to expect darkness and when to expect to have brighter lights on the fish tank. The other thing that we want to keep consistent is if we've got a tank that's already cycled, we want to have a bit of a routine for water changes as if possible, and for how large of a water change we do as well. So depending on what your tank is like, everyone's going to have different ways that they do water changes. If you've got a really heavily planted tank, you're not going to have to do water changes as often because your nitrates aren't going to spike that high when your plants are actually taking some of that nutrition from the water. Whereas if you've got a tank like what I do and the only plants you have are algae and you've got a pretty high bioload of fish in there producing a lot of waste, then you're going to get nitrates that get pretty high by a week normally. When I do a water change, I try to keep everything consistent in terms of the temperature of the water that's going into the tank, the pH of the water. So I'll use a buffer to make sure that the pH doesn't drop too much when I'm putting in the tap water that has a lower pH compared to my tank water. And the other thing to be mindful of as well is with nitrates, fish can actually start to adapt and tolerate higher levels of nitrates. And if you do a huge, like 80 or 90% water change out of nowhere and you had really high nitrates in your tank, then that can actually be really disruptive for the fish. Even though you've technically got water now that's better quality because the nitrates are lower, because there's been that inconsistency and there's that huge swing and change in the chemistry of the water, the fish don't cope with that very well, and it can actually stress them out quite a bit. So we just want to be really careful that with our water chemistry, as long as we're keeping it consistent and routine, our fish tend to thrive. I find that a lot of the time, less is more, and the more that we actually start to stress about the fish, then sometimes the more that we make things worse. Because a lot of the time, if we're being really stressed out and worried, then we start doing things and acting too quickly and changing stuff. Including as well with our filter, I try not to touch my canister filters too often, because even with the beneficial bacteria in there, I like them to just kind of do their thing and leave them for a long time. And I find that the less that you disturb things, oftentimes the better it tends to go, unless you really know exactly what you're doing and it's very intentional. All right, so now that brings me to the second point, which is enrichment. And I really like talking about enrichment because I think it's one of the more kind of fun things that we can do for our aquarium fish. What I talk about is actually adding things to their life to increase the quality of their life. So this is things like having a water current in the water. So putting a wave maker in the tank, I find, especially for African cichlids, because they like to have a bit of a current. This is something that they can really enjoy actually swimming against, and sometimes they'll even swim in front of it and let it knock them back a bit. And it just creates some stimulation and some movement in the tank. There are some species of fish, like angelfish for example, that don't like having a strong current. So of course, when you're listening to this stuff, just make sure that it applies to the species of fish that you've got as well. In terms of other things for enrichment, things like actually having a variety of food that you feed your fish and changing it up. Now, I don't just mean different types, as in like having an algae-based food or having a food that has more protein. I mean actually different types, as in having a flake food, having a big pellet that floats, having a sinking pellet, so that there's this kind of variety and different things that the fish can actually try and chase after when it's food time. The other thing that I think that they really tend to like is if you've got a species of fish that likes to dig around, then having a really nice substrate bed of sand so that they can mimic the behaviors that they enjoy engaging in when they're in the wild. My African cichlids love to dig in the substrate and to look through it for food. They like to make big holes and stuff for breeding as well, and they're often shifting the sand around in the tank. It's something that tends to keep them pretty busy in there. So if you've got a fish and you know what it likes to do in the wild, seeing if you can mimic some of that stuff actually in your own fish tank. The other thing I find that they really like too is having decor. So this could be having things like caves, having rocks that they can hide in. A lot of fish, like again, angelfish or discus, they really like having plants in the tank as well. And they quite enjoy going around and picking on the plants and swimming between them. So just thinking of how can you make the tank have something in it that suits your fish's needs. This tank is suited to the needs of the African cichlids because the things that they like are having a sand bed, having open water to be able to swim in, but then also having rocky caved areas, especially for the rock-dwelling African cichlids, the mbuna. So I've got everything that these fish like having, including the current as well from the wave maker, and that just provides them with an element of enrichment in the tank as well that's well suited to their needs. The other thing that you might like to do as well is purposefully actually grow some algae on your rocks if you don't have plants in your tank. It just gives them something to pick on throughout the day if they would like to do that. The other thing too is having company for your fish. So having other fish that are compatible species with them so that they've got other fish to actually interact with throughout the day. Even in terms of aggression with my African cichlids, when I see my peacocks being aggressive to each other, as long as it's not super brutal and it's not all of the time, then it's actually a good thing in my eyes to see, because I like to see them actually mimicking their natural behavior. And if an animal is able to be aggressive, then oftentimes it also means that they're in good health, because they're able to have that energy to try and be dominant and chase each other around. So I really don't see I guess, healthy amount of aggression as a bad thing in any way. I actually think that it's something that can be good to see your fish doing. Alright, that's everything for this video. I hope that you found it helpful going through some of these ideas for how to keep fish happy and healthy in the fish tank. If anyone else has any other advice, then I would love for you to leave it in the comments down below as well. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like, and if you're enjoying my content and you haven't subscribed, then I would love for you to subscribe. You can also hit the little bell notification when you say subscribe, and that'll notify you anytime that I upload new videos as well. Alright, that's everything, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!